once was a troop of Irish dragoons came marching down through 5-ho. The captains fought in love with a very bonny lass, her name it described pretty Peggy, ho. So come down the stair, pretty Peggy, my dear, come down the stair, pretty Peggy, oh. Come down the stair, tie back your yellow hair, say a last farewell to your daddy, ho. Oh, I never did intend a captain's lady for to be, I never will marry a soldier, ho. I never did intend taking to a foreign land, and I never will enter your chamber, ho. Then up cried the colonel, mount, boys, mount. Oh, but our captain cries, tarry, oh, and tarry for a while, just another day or twa, to see if this bonny lass will marry, oh. It's braw, captain's lady for to be, it's braw to be a captain's lady, oh. It's braw to rant and rave, and to follow at his word, and to ride when your captain he is ready, oh. Oh, I never did intend a captain's lady for to be, I never will marry a soldier, oh. I never did intend taking to a foreign land, I never will enter your chamber, oh. 'Twas in the early morning when we marched to war, oh, but our captain was sorry, oh. The drums they did beat, the bonny bays a geet, and the pipes played the lowlands of 5-ho. Lang ere we came to old Meldrum Toon, we had our captain to carry, oh. Lang ere we came to bonny Aberdeen, we had our captain to bury, oh. Oh, there's many a bonny lass in the How of Octoless, there's many a bonny lass in the Geary, oh. There's many a bonny Jean in the streets of Aberdeen, but the flower of them all bides in 5-ho. Good morning, this is Dawn Hollis on the Academic Commute, and that was the Bonny Lass of 5-e, which is once again another old folk song, just like the one from yesterday is also from Aberdeen. The 5-e is in Aberdeenshire, although there's a certain school of thought which argues that in fact the song is set in Fife and is about the Fair Maid of Fife, which is an interpretation I tend to favour just because I really like Fife, but the references to Old Meldrum Toon and the different rivers and locations makes it much more likely this is definitely an Aberdeen folk song. I like it because a lot of vast majority of folk songs are about the relationship between men and women, and being most of them written at a certain time present a sort of certain patriarchal vision of how those relationships might go. Astonishingly large number involving a woman falling in love, getting pregnant, and then of course the young man abandoning her to raise the child alone. Whereas this one is, a soldier falls in love with the bonny lass of 5-e, and she says, no, I don't fancy you actually, and he goes off and melodramatically dies in battle or whatever, or of a broken heart as we're told in the song, but so it's quite nice to have a folk song which shows a sort of a woman having the right to say no. I quite like that, and there are lots of different versions of the song, and how the order in which you sing the verses is very variable, and I chose to have the sort of repeated refusal to come along, the soldier constantly coming back and saying, oh no, here are more reasons to marry me, and she's still saying no, I said no the first time. And so I thought this was an appropriate song to choose with its potential reference to Fife, because I'm in fact currently driving to Fife. I am on the A9 heading between Dunblane and Perth, and yeah, so I'm going for my first day at work at the University of St Andrews in the School of Classics. So as I mentioned yesterday, I did my PhD at St Andrews but in the School of History, so whilst I am in fact going back to the same university, It is a bit different, and it does feel quite sort of exciting, like the first day at school. So I'm feeling pretty excited. It's quite early in the morning. It's 7:45, which for me feels fairly early, especially when I haven't had a cup of coffee yet. So please forgive any incoherency in this podcast, especially as this is my first time. I think this is my first time recording and driving on a dual carriageway. So if there are any sort of pauses as I kind of look over my shoulder to overtake, then please forgive me. There was one just there actually. On which note, it's probably worth introducing the podcast listeners to, if there are any, to a very important character in the podcast, which is my car. She's a very noisy car, as you can probably hear. Her friends call her Winifred, and she's called that because it's a Honda Jazz, 2004 Honda Jazz, and it's a sort of lovely aqua kind of metallic aqua colour. And I always joke that she's an old lady with a blue rinse, and Winifred struck me and my husband as being a sort of nice old-fashioned 1950s kind of name, so that's why the car is Winifred. I'm the kind of person who names cars. I apologise. And so Winifred is my first car ever, because I didn't pass my driving test until I was living up in Sandwich doing my PhD. She's very reliable. Poor thing is, I think, 121,000 miles on the clock. Probably, I think about 30,000 of that was just me, and I've probably, not been particularly kind. Probably accelerating rather faster than her previous elderly owners ever did. So Winifred serves me very well, and she is going to be the setting for all of my podcasts. So Winifred, meet the listeners meet Winifred. So today I said I was going to talk about the academic journey, or indeed what we could call the academic commute, in a sort of long-term view, and to talk about sort of where I've come from in my own personal academic journey and where I might be going. And I think the thing that I want to emphasise, because it's something that has always been a challenge for me to sort of think through, is the fact that the academic journey is not a straight line, even though it does have a sort of fairly a clear and expected series of sort of waymarkers and milestones. It is in fact a road that has a lot of potential forks off of it, and I think it's important to acknowledge that there are choices to be made at different stages. It's not a sort of endless treadmill of undergraduate, postgraduate, postdoc, lectureship, professorship, whatever. And that's something that for me has very much been a part of my own journey. So I guess where to start? I'm a historian, so you'll have to forgive me for starting sort of back in the sands of time. So I guess at school, I was always one of those kids who I absolutely adored school. I was one of those kids who would, be sad at the end of the school day, and be really keen to catch the bus in the morning, rather than sort of just wishing it away and then just wanting to go home and do my thing. I just really liked being at school, and I guess it was fairly inevitable because of that I would then choose to go to university, and I ended up going to the University of Oxford. I was at Balliol College, and this was I want to talk at more length in another podcast about Oxbridge, because I have in fact been to both halves, rather without meaning to, but it was I think one of the most surreal experiences of my life, and looking back on it, that's the only way I can sort of talk about it. It was a remarkably rewarding intellectual experience. I still remember sitting in the library in the first week. They give you an essay question and a list of readings. The reading was something like Wormold on P Celtic and Q Celtic. Oh my god. And it just blew my mind. It was something that I didn't understand any of it, but I was just sitting in this gorgeous old building, and the only thing I was expected to do was to read and write, and I just found that absolutely amazing. And the conversation sort of, at Oxford there's the tutorial system, so the way you're taught is every week you write at least one essay, and then you have a meeting with your tutor, either 1-on-1, 2-on-1, sometimes 3-on-1, but they're very small class sizes, and you talk about your essay, which is a remarkably intensive way of teaching. I'm not sure it's necessarily the most pedagogically effective form of teaching, but for some people, when it works incredibly well, and it did work to give me a lot of experience in talking about my work, and sort of just the freedom to try out all of these different ideas, and my degree is modern history, but I did everything from the world of Homer and Hesiod all the way up to 19th century China, so it was sort of this vast swathe of time, and sort of from an academic perspective it was a really amazing experience. I also met my husband at Oxford. He was a postgraduate, I was an undergraduate. It was a bit of a Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, although rather amusingly I think the people who were most okay with it were all of my undergraduate friends, and then all of his postgrad friends were like, "You've got a girlfriend and now you're getting engaged to her and you're getting married, well, why would you do such a thing?" Sorry, I'm just overtaking a plant and tool hire van. There we go. Where was I? Yeah. And so it's also hard to look back on sort of time at Oxford without it being sort of associated with the start of my relationship with my husband, and all of the sort of life changes that entailed. We moved in together in my last year at Oxford, and then, last year at university, you've always got sort of that question, what are you going to do next? And once again, it was fairly inevitable that I was going to go on to do a master's. I couldn't really see myself, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at that stage, and more education, more studying seemed like a great plan. But of course, once you get to master's level, there's the problem of funding, which is that, undergraduate is very easy, you just get your student loans, still paying those off quite definitively, and you go along and you don't really sort of think about it. Your fees are being paid for you, you're being given a nice chunk of money to live on, it's pretty lush. And then master's level, at least when I was at master's level, there weren't loans catered for students to attend university. It was more of a 5-lane red car, don't let me overtake. I think there are now student loans for postgraduate degrees, but there weren't when I was applying. The only thing you could apply for was sort of like a private bank loan, which would obviously have much higher rates of interest, and wasn't really something I was considering. So I just applied to, I can't remember which universities I applied to in the end, but it was a pretty wide range of them, and the aim was to hopefully get funding, and I did eventually get funding for the MPhil in early modern history at the University of Cambridge, I was very lucky. I was on the reserve list for the HSE, and someone, for some bizarre reason, dropped out, so I ended up taking their space, which was really fortunate, because there's no way I would have done a master's without, no way I would have been able to have done a master's without that support, so that was really great. And moved to Cambridge, and so this was a bit of an interesting time, sort of personally for myself and for my husband, which sort of I think affected my experience of the space intellectually speaking, which is that we were busy applying for a spousal visa for my husband to be able to stay in the UK, and it was sort of by no means guaranteed that he would be able to stay in the UK, that we would get that spousal visa, so that was a huge worry, and then these things take months and months and months, so we had a long time being sort of everything being very up in the air. We were also remarkably poor, because my husband was had just finished his PhD and had a sort of part-time teaching job at Oxford, which he had to get a 3.5-hour bus for, and then we had my master's stipend, which was something like £8,500, which was, lovely. It was free money, but two people living in Cambridge on a very small income was not the most stress-free experience, and also because I was married, my college, which was Queen's College, didn't have a great deal of couples accommodation, and so we weren't living in college, we were living in different accommodation, and the whole sort of social setup of the graduate community at Queen's was quite sort of not really family life friendly, in the sense that, I think I went to one event, got chatting to a guy. I mentioned my husband, and he then sort of walked off and stopped talking to me. It was quite an interesting social setting, and it wasn't hugely sort of supportive of people who came with other people attached to them. So I was quite isolated and wasn't in a particularly happy space at Cambridge. But nevertheless, the course was really good. I think I found my undergraduate course more mind-opening than I found the masters, but that might just have been because I was at a stage to have my mind opened, whereas by the time I got to my masters I already had slightly clearer ideas. And I got to write the lovely thing, although not everyone would agree this is a positive thing about the Cambridge MPhil, is that the thesis, the dissertation element, is, I think it's 25,000 words, not including footnotes. So I ended up writing a 30,000 word dissertation. Most master's dissertations are about 12,000 words. So that really gave me a chance to really dig into a topic, and I looked at Thomas Burnett's Sacred Theory of the Earth and the various debates surrounding it. And I will talk more about Thomas Burnett at another podcast, but now is not the time. Sorry, Thomas Burnett. So that was really good, I think, and that really gave me a chance to sort of dig into the research topic that would eventually lead to my PhD. But of course, the weird bit about the sort of academic treadmill is it speeds up rapidly between the last year of undergraduate and the first year of your PhD, because you apply for your masters, you get in, you go to your masters, and then in basically the first 2 months of doing a master's course, you're already applying for PhD courses. One of the universities I applied for required a sample of graduate work, and it's like, well, I haven't submitted any graduate work yet because we've only been in the master's course for 30 days by the time I'm trying to submit this application. So it was quite, you don't have a lot of chance to stop and think, although you do have a lot of chance to think between making the applications and then the results coming out. And in that time I'd become very ambivalent about working in academia, and I think this was partly to do with being in Oxbridge. So for example, my husband was working at one of the colleges in Oxford, and like I said, commuting on the X5 bus, which is a bus which anyone who's ever lived in Oxford or Cambridge, if you mention the word X5, you'll see them sort of go slightly green in sympathy with the thought of it. It goes around every single roundabout between Oxford and Cambridge, and there are a lot of them, and it also goes through both Bedford and Milton Keynes, which, although I'm sure they're lovely places to live, are not the most enjoyable places from inside a coach. And so he was having to commute, which was something that was sort of a long commute, which wasn't particularly pleasant. The environment at Oxford is such that, and Cambridge, they generally pay less than other universities because they give you other things in kind, and one of those things in kind is feeding you at high table, which is a ridiculous artifice. Delicious, but a bit ridiculous. And of course the problem with that is, once again, that's not very compatible with wanting to just spend time at home with your people. So it's like almost an expectation that my husband would turn up unaccompanied and socialise with his colleagues outside of what I would deem to be appropriate working hours. And so that was sort of like, I didn't really see that life as, I didn't want to be either myself going or having my husband go off to high table 3 times a week just to sort of keep up with the various people in college and with the sort of expectations. And also that sort of, everyone was saying to us, if you want to be a couple who are in academia, then you're probably going to have to live, countries apart at some point in your future. And I really didn't. That was not a compromise I was willing to make. And so I sort of thought, well, what else could I do? I was and I was not happy in academia at that time, and so I thought, well, what else could I do? This is a bit of a question for history graduates. My grandmother, when I first went to university, sent me a newspaper clipping which had statistics for employment rates of graduates from different subjects, and history was like on the bottom of the graph. So like, thanks grandma, a bit late now, but so one of the things I thought of was teaching, which is a fairly sort of, I think, common career path for historians and undergraduates, and so I applied to do, it wasn't Teach First, it was called Schools Direct. It was a scheme where you went and did your PGCE, but at the same time as doing your PGCE you were already based in a single school, and that single school would train you specifically to take up a role there. So schools would sort of say, well, we've got an opening coming up in a year or 2 years time for a history teacher, and they would then get a student on the PGCE who would be who they would basically train specifically for that role. So the application process was kind of an application for a job with the training sort of blended in, which was really, really nice. And I ended up interviewing at a wonderful school in Oxfordshire. It was really, yeah, it wasn't a school that was sort of academically excellent, but it had a wonderful approach to teaching, and the kids were all happy, and it just it would have been a fantastic place to work. And I did in fact get the offer of the job there, and I cycled home to tell Kelsey that I had got this job and that we could celebrate. And I got home and I opened my laptop and I opened my email, and I had an email sitting there from the Director of Postgraduate Studies at St Andrews saying, we'd like to offer you a fully funded PhD position, which was absolutely sort of flabbergasting, and was not something I was automatically like, yes, this is something I'm going to do. It took, there was several days at least of sort of soul searching and really thinking about whether or not which of these paths I should be taking. And one of the concerns was that at least down in sort of Oxfordshire area, my husband had contacts, so he would have potentially more chance of getting casual teaching. Oh no, look at this for a backlog. Oh dear. So yeah, so we thought, you know, if we moved to Scotland, what would he do? Because he didn't know anyone up there who would potentially be able to give him any casual teaching. And for those who are not academics who are listening, while sort of permanent jobs and full-time jobs tend to, you know, are elected in the fashion that normal jobs are, sort of casual employment, such as sort of doing 2 or 3 hours a week teaching, is the kind of thing that is really distributed by personal contacts, i.e. nepotism. So we were concerned that Kelsey would lack those networks up in Scotland, and it was a long way to move. But on the upside, my husband had previously done a year abroad at St Andrews and absolutely adored it. And also, you know, it was 3 years I was being offered, you know, apart from the sort of, you know, the cost of my time and sort of 3 years of my life, I was being offered essentially a free chance to do a PhD. I wasn't having to invest my own money or go into debt in order to do it. I would actually be paid to do it. I'd be getting a stipend. And so eventually I decided that was a chance that was just not one I could ever pass up. But I did very much, when I decided to take the PhD up, it was with the idea of, this is so I can do a PhD, so I can produce this piece of research, and that might well be the end of it. I was not at that stage sort of going, well, I'm going to do a PhD so I can go on to get an academic job and to stay in academia, because like I said, I was at a very ambivalent place at that stage. So I went up to St Andrews, and just St Andrews, it's basically it felt very different to me, but I think to most people they'd say it was kind of like the Oxbridge of Scotland. It's a sort of very strange little corner of Scotland in a way, but it's a wonderful place, and I found the history department there to be so welcoming and incredibly more open to sort of innovative research and innovative methods, and I found that really, really enjoyable. And my husband and I moved to a place called Crail, which is a small village on the southern tip of Fife, which was really kind of life-changing. It was just the best place we've ever lived, and we really want to move back there, but more of that at a later date. And so I had a really very happy 3 years doing my PhD. But then, of course, the PhD comes to an end, and you have that sort of decision. Well, what do I do next? And once again, I had reached a sort of stage of ambivalence and perhaps like sort of cynicism or exhaustion. So to kind of back up a bit, during the PhD, I had spent a lot of time not only doing my research, but also getting quite involved in something which is called either student development or research development, which basically means sort of trying to improve structures and skills training for people at the university. And I was particularly interested in sort of postgraduate development, so trying to improve situations for PhD students and master's students, and became incredibly interested in writing skills and what's known as a generative approach to writing, which is sort of trying to write as quickly as possible, which is not something that many academics do particularly well. And so this was sort of something I became very interested in, and sort of considering as an alternate career path, as something which would keep me within the sort of university world, but wouldn't necessarily mean being an academic, because I had also become quite cynical about the extent to which within an academic sort of setting there are things which don't work, or things which aren't sort of perfect in terms of process or systems, and of course no one will change them. There's a joke which I think applies to all academia, which is originally about Oxford and Cambridge, which is how many Oxbridge dons does it take to change a light bulb? Change. And so I'm the kind of person who likes to fix things and improve stuff, and so it seemed to me that maybe sort of temperamentally doing research development would be more rewarding for me than staying in academia. And I also sort of really wanted to pursue my own writing. So before I ever wrote academic essays and master's dissertations and PhD theses, I loved writing fiction and sort of popular writing, magazine writing. And so I thought, well, I would really like to give myself a chance to write the novel, and to see if I could actually make money from my writing, perhaps from my research development. And so I decided that after I finished the PhD, I would have a go at freelancing for a year or so. And so I got myself registered self-employed with the HMRC, and I set up various. I ended up doing a whole sort of range of different freelance jobs. So I did my writing. I did a little bit. I got a couple of magazine articles published and was paid, which was absolutely astonishing compared to the academic situation where you write 10,000 word journal articles and have to pay to get them published. And sorry, just a roundabout, very busy. And I did proofreading and copy editing. I actually found the proofreading remarkably rewarding. I was working for a company called Jishik, which is a company who provides sort of support and advice to students who are from China who are applying to universities in the UK and the US. And so many of these students were just remarkably impressive, and so grateful and keen to accept help. So it was really, it was very rewarding, and it actually was quite a good sort of teaching experience to get a chance to sort of teach in a different context online. And I just enjoyed that a lot more than I thought I would, when I thought that would kind of be the bread and butter element of the freelancing. And then the other big element of freelancing was running workshops for various universities, particularly for St Andrews, on this sort of whole writing skills and sort of project planning and issues like that. So that was, and things were going really, really well. I was at a stage where I wasn't making a huge amount of money, but I could see that the path to making a sort of reasonable income was a possibility. Sorry, I'm just being kind of bullied by a van who is about 10 inches from my bumper at 80 miles an hour, which is not helpful. Sorry, you will also probably get a lot of my sort of commentary on the other drivers on the road. I tend to talk to myself when driving, so this is kind of like meta. So the freelancing was starting to take off, and I was starting to see a way for it to sort of really work really well. And then a job advert came on for a postdoc job position in the School of Classics at St Andrews, to a 3-year postdoc, and the project was mountains in ancient literature and culture and their post-classical reception, with the postdoc focusing on the post-classical reception, so looking at 18th and 19th century receptions of classical attitudes to mountains. And bear in mind that my thesis was on early modern attitudes to mountains. I mean, a lot of people, when I tell them about it, like, so was this written for you? I'm like, no, it wasn't. I'd met the principal investigator once or twice before, but I had no idea this postdoc was coming up until I saw the job advert. And that kind of, although obviously at that stage I didn't, it wasn't the same as the HSC, as the funding for the PhD, because it wasn't that, I had to apply and go through and get the job. But it was a similar sort of moment of, oh my God, here's a big decision. Here's an opportunity that is something very different from what I had been anticipating a few weeks ago. And once again, I did take a couple of days sort of like, should I apply? Because I knew that once I applied, I would be emotionally committed to this idea of doing this project. But eventually, once again, it was kind of like, this is not an opportunity to pass up. And I think in making that decision, I kind of realised that I kind of did miss the freedom to do research and that sort of academic environment. And so I applied, and in applying became even more sort of like, I really, really want this. And was incredibly fortunate to be offered the position. I spent about sort of 3 weeks, every time I'd sort of walk into the room, my husband would say, I got the job! Because it sort of seemed so kind of surreal and ridiculous and wonderful. And that was a big change in where I'd seen things going. Indeed, one of my PhD supervisors commented rather dryly that I was the only person she'd ever met who decided that they were going to leave academia and then got the first job they applied for. So that's a bit embarrassing, really. So now I'm looking ahead at 3 years. This is my first day. At 3 years of doing more research and working on this project, and hopefully sort of building up my CV for whatever I want to do afterwards. And the problem is I still don't know what I want to do when I leave school. So I'm definitely currently planning to make sure that I have all of the sort of prerequisites for applying for another academic job afterwards. So I'm trying to make sure that I build up my teaching. So I've got experience of teaching sub-honours, but I'm keen to get some lectures. I'm keen to do some master's teaching, some honours teaching, possibly even designing a module, because essentially probably most of the jobs I'd be looking at applying for after the postdoc would be academic jobs anyway, would be teaching heavy, and so you really do have to prove that you've got the chops for doing intensive and teaching at different levels, and just having that experience. Obviously also having some publications out, but I mean, fortunately this is kind of like the whole point of the postdoc is to get publications out, and because the theme of the postdoc is so close to my own research that doing writing for the postdoc and doing writing for my own purposes that kind of overlap. Oh, there's a lorry doing an overtaking manoeuvre, and we're now all slowing down to 50 miles an hour in the outside lane because he's trying to indicate out. I don't like overtaking lorries when they look like they're trying to jump out, because you're never quite sure when you're going to be in their blind spot and when they're going to try and leap out. So I always try and either give them lots of space or to get past them as quickly as possible, which I have not done, so that's good. So yeah, and so trying to get some publications out, moving towards sort of the first book. So this is another one of those big academic milestones, is getting the first book published. And this is something that I have sort of mixed thoughts about, because of my sort of like, I never did write that novel this year, by the way. But that, you know, wanting to write for a wider audience than just the sort of the academic audience, than just from sort of university libraries and so on. And so, and my PhD topic on mountains is the kind of thing that lots of people are interested in. So I'm very torn as to sort of exactly what form the book might take. Do I want a book that is sort of speaking solely to an academic audience? Do I want a book that is a crossover book, you know, one that's with an academic press but is marketed for a wider audience? Or do I want to go for a trade book, the kind of thing you will actually see in Waterstones? And that's something that I don't really know yet. That's a question that I need to answer at some point over the next few years. So there's that element of sort of, you know, the publication, teaching publications, and then other areas of sort of experience in academic service, sort of being known as someone who can organise things and has familiarity with sort of, you know, dealing with committees and doing sort of administrative work, is another big part of the sort of mid-career academic jobs. And unfortunately, fortunately, I have a really weird personality, and I quite enjoy sort of administration and council meetings and stuff like that. I'm quite sad, really. Sorry, got some interesting stuff going on in the outside lane. Where was I? Yeah, so sort of basically trying to get myself to the point where if I wanted to, at the end of the 3 years, I could apply for a lectureship or for more sort of, short-term teaching contracts or whatever. But once again, I kind of want to leave my options open. And this is not necessarily a lack of commitment to academia, but rather a sort of a surfeit perhaps of realism. So I'm biased, but I think that my husband is one of the more brilliant people I know, and watched him spend several years unemployed before getting his postdoc. And I'm quite realistic about sort of the rates of success in terms of succeeding in establishing an academic career. And like I said, one of sort of the things the place I draw the line with regards to academia being a couple in academia is the stage at which we are living and working sort of many, many miles apart. For me, I'm the kind of person who has lots of interests and lots of different skills and lots of things that I think I would be capable of doing and capable of being very happy doing. And so I'm not willing to sacrifice everything in terms of my home life and my personal happiness on the altar of being an academic. And so I am very open-minded about what might happen next, and that depends entirely on sort of a whole range of other factors. So sort of, you know, if a job comes up in Essex, I'm not applying for it. If a job comes up in Edinburgh, Glasgow, I will apply for it. So that's a limitation which is most people don't set on their academic job searches, and is something which I know makes my chances a lot harder. But that's sort of one of the terms that I've set for myself. So I want to have the option to do other things if I need to. And so one of the things that one of the things other than the proofreading, which I really loved about my freelancing time, was doing this, was giving workshops and doing this sort of skills development, skills training to students from a whole wide range of disciplines, not just teaching my own subject to students doing history. And in fact, rather ironically, on the first day of my work, I am fulfilling a freelance contract which I signed up for many months before I even knew the job was coming up. I'm running a dissertation bootcamp at St Andrews, so I'm going to have half a day in my new office, and then I'm going to be spending a day and a half running this dissertation bootcamp, which I'm really looking forward to. And so something that I have spoken to my PI about, principal investigator, PI from henceforth, is sort of whether he's happy with me continuing to do this sort of research development, continuing to run these workshops. Unfortunately, he said yes. So that is definitely something where I'm going to keep my finger in the pie, and try and keep designing workshops and keep delivering workshops, because this is the kind of thing that is incredibly sort of adaptable. I mean, if, for example, I end up not having a job after the end of the postdoc, I can then at least earn something freelance, and I can also sort of, if I do, for example, in this situation where I've got the postdoc, I'm not making a huge effort to sell myself or to acquire more universities that I'm delivering to. But if I was in a situation where I didn't have any other employment, I could, with effort and diplomacy, probably up the rates of workshops I was giving and thus raise my income. So it's a very flexible thing to keep to sort of maintain as an option, which is very exciting. So I think that's probably sort of the main area that I'd be keen to go into. Of course, if I end up writing the best-selling novel and selling it before the end of the postdoc, I probably wouldn't be too unhappy about just living in a writer's shed for the rest of my life. I don't know, actually, maybe I'll get lonely. But for the time being, I'm really just delighted to be driving in to a job with an office and colleagues and set targets. Certainly, I found freelancing very rewarding, but it is an incredibly challenging way of earning your daily bread. It requires a ridiculous amount of sort of self-motivation and the ability to cope with sort of solitary working and not that I need a boss to be telling me what I need to do, but basically being your own boss and having to sort of say to yourself, look, you have to do this, otherwise you won't earn money, which is not something that happens in most career paths. I'm sorry, the road is really noisy right here. Right, sorry, I'm back after a break there. I briefly had to concentrate a bit harder as we headed into Dundee. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, where I'm sort of looking to the future. And I guess what I'm sort of, the moral of my story anyway is that although the progress from one sort of stage to another when you're thinking in terms of an academic career, although it looks very inevitable, there's actually, for me anyway, there was a choice at almost every single stage from masters onwards, and I've never felt that just because I did masters I had to do a PhD, or because I did a PhD I had to become had to go onto a postdoc. And indeed I although I hope that having had the postdoc will make getting a subsequent academic job more possible, I won't feel that just because I've had a postdoc that the only thing I can possibly do is stay in academia. And I think certainly as a PhD student sort of trying to make these decisions myself, something I felt really lacking in was having role models to consider other options, because of course the only people you're communicating with are people for whom the treadmill continued, and possibly not smoothly, but from the outside it looks like they moved easily from one level to the next and just stayed in academia. And you never see the people who left, and you very rarely hear the stories of people saying, well, you know, I thought about leaving and these are the other things I considered, and all of these would have been realistic and good options for me and fulfilling options for me. And so I guess that was just what I wanted to talk about, potentially to any PhD students who are listening, or master students, or people who are just thinking, well, is this for me? And I think there's a lot of, so part of my PhD thesis, I'm interested in how discourses are created and what impact that has on our thinking. And so I think there's a certain discourse within academia, a certain sort of rhetoric of this idea of it being a calling. It's almost like sort of being called to the church is something which is, such a, the need to research, the need to teach is so innate that there's nothing else you could possibly do. And there are certainly people for whom that is true, and I think that my husband was born to be a university professor. It fits his personality exactly, it fits his skills exactly. But then I think that there is no problem and no shame in being a person for whom you would give your all to it if it happened, but you don't have to do that. You don't feel that it is the be all and end all of your potential sort of career path. And I think it's important to sort of be loud about the possibility of academia not being an inevitability, even if your training suggests that you should be going for that and that alone. And indeed, one of the workshops which I run is all about sort of the idea of treating a PhD as an apprenticeship. Sort of not only what do you do, you're writing a PhD, but also you're trying to develop skills. And the skills which you develop for an academic career are also ones which you can turn around and say, no, these apply to all sorts of other options for my future. So that, is probably my story. I do want to acknowledge, I think after sort of painting this narrative of Oxford, Cambridge, St Andrews, fell into a postdoc, that I am conscious of having been incredibly lucky, and of having a really sort of gilded route through it all. And I'm sure there are probably some people who are listening to this who just feel sick with envy and irritation at me, and I apologise for that. And so that's another point, which is that I have had it remarkably easy. I have been funded throughout. I have, there haven't been any stages of long unemployment for me. But that is a reality for many people. It is not. It's not a career path that goes without demanding a lot from you. Although, of course, that's true of any sort of career, I suppose. But yeah, I know I've been very lucky. But even in the midst of this incredibly lucky journey, I have had a lot of doubts and a lot of time where I've been really consciously sort of weighing up the different options. But for the time being, I consciously weighed up the option of doing more research, and I am really looking forward to going and doing that research. So I will stop there.